Imagine a public square pulsing with tension, all eyes fixated on the looming gallows. A man climbs the platform, noose around his neck, and takes a final, haunting look at the crowd. The trapdoor snaps open. Everyone holds their breath, pondering the agonizing moments that will decide his fate between life and death. Hanging isn't just an execution method, it's a dark tapestry woven through millennia, from Europe's medieval dungeons to America's Wild West. We often think of hanging as a quick and efficient means to an end, but is that really the case? What if I told you that there are documented cases where people survived or lingered on, defying our common perceptions? Welcome to Pastflix. We're about to dive into the grim mechanics, astonishing stories, and the ethical questions that hang in the balance. The genesis of hanging. Long before the invention of electric chairs, gas chambers, or lethal injections, mankind had discovered a brutal, yet straightforward method of execution. Hanging. Picture yourself walking through the sands of time to ancient Babylon, almost 4,000 years ago. Here, inscribed in cuneiform on a massive stone stele, we find the Code of Hammurabi, one of the world's earliest set of laws. It mentions hanging as a legitimate punishment for specific crimes. Let that sink in. Our ancestors were handing out death by suspension before they even had a written alphabet. Now, let's turn the pages of history to another book, the Bible. Believe it or not, hanging even makes its way into sacred scriptures. Remember the story of Judas Iscariot? After betraying Jesus Christ, guilt led him to hang himself. It's a grim picture that has been immortalized in countless artistic depictions, and it raises questions about morality and retribution that reverberate through millennia. Flipping a few more chapters in the Bible, you'll find Haman, the infamous villain from the Book of Esther. This high-ranking advisor in the Persian Empire hatched a malicious plot to annihilate all the Jews. However, in an extraordinary twist of fate, after his plans unraveled, Haman found himself swinging from the very gallows he had built for Mordecai, Esther's cousin. These biblical tales of Judas and Haman add layers of complexity to our understanding of hanging. It wasn't just the Babylonians who were hanging offenders. The practice was prevalent in multiple ancient cultures. The Romans, not to be outdone in the realm of punitive measures, also utilized hanging, although they had a particular fondness for crucifixion. What's striking here is that hanging was a method that transcended geographic boundaries and civilizations. Whether you were a Roman slave or a Babylonian thief, you could find yourself at the end of a noose. And if you think hanging is a one-size-fits-all death sentence, think again. Ancient civilizations had their own variations, from simple suspensions to agonizing techniques designed to prolong suffering. Depending on the society and the crime, the method of your execution could vary dramatically. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Could the way you were hanged say something about how your community saw you? Or the crime you'd committed? The British chapter. From Tyburn Tree to the modern era. Our narrative winds from ancient scrolls to England's misty streets, home to the notorious Tyburn Tree, a gallows, not a tree, that served as London's grim amphitheater. Capable of hanging 24 individuals at once, Tyburn was Britain's death stage from the 12th century until 1783. Far from a solemn event, these were ghastly public spectacles. Families gathered, vendors peddled, and the condemned took their final, chilling bow. For over 6 centuries, until its last act in 1783, the Tyburn Tree bore witness to the final moments of the convicted. Commoners, pirates, knights, and even American spies. One instance is the tragic tale of William Wallace, the indomitable Scottish knight. His resistance against English occupation earned him a horrifying end. Hanged, drawn, and quartered in 1305. However, the end he met was neither quick nor merciful. The complexities and agonizing duration of his execution became a somber echo in the corridors of history. The intent was clear: to make an example out of him, to prolong the suffering as a stark warning to others. The gallows were not just for rebels and common criminals, but also a stage for ideological battles. Take Thomas More, the English philosopher who defied King Henry VIII's break from the Catholic Church. Sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, More received a last-minute mercy. He was beheaded instead. While this might seem like a small favor, the switch reveals the complications and variables that could exist even within the well-defined parameters of capital punishment. And let's not forget Captain William Kidd, a Scottish pirate whose luck ran out when he was tried and hanged in London in 1701. His execution wasn't smooth sailing, so to speak. It's said that the first rope broke, prolonging his final moments and adding a layer of grotesque spectacle to the event. It wasn't just an execution, it was a brutal public lesson. Across the Atlantic, Nathan Hale, an American spy during the Revolutionary War, met his fate at the hands of the British in 1776. As the noose tightened, his purported last words, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country," became the stuff of legends. The agony of his death was paradoxically elevated by the dignity of his final statement. But the British didn't keep hanging as their exclusive pastime. They generously exported it to other colonies. As the sun never set on the British Empire, neither did the shadow of the gallows. Over time, even the British began questioning the morality and ethics of hanging. The 19th century saw the British Parliament slowly chipping away at the list of crimes punishable by death. Fast forward to 1868, and the United Kingdom witnessed its last public hanging. Finally, the act was completely abolished in 1965, marking the end of a blood-soaked chapter in British history. The American Saga, from colonial roots to the electric chair. Our historical voyage now crosses the Atlantic to the United States, where the legacy of hanging runs deep. If Tyburn Tree was London's stage for execution, then the entire vast landscape of early America served as the backdrop for this chilling form of capital punishment. Up until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, if you were sentenced to death in the US, chances were you'd be meeting the hangman's noose. In the aftermath of President Abraham Lincoln's assassination, eyes turned not just to the male co-conspirators, but also to Mary Surratt, becoming the first woman executed by the US federal government. Her hanging became a watershed moment. It prompted intense public debate about gender, culpability, and the justice system. But beneath the political and social undercurrents lay a woman whose final moments were fraught with unbearable tension and agony. Fast forward to more recent times, and we find the execution of Saddam Hussein, the former president of Iraq, by hanging. Convicted of crimes against humanity, Hussein's execution was not just the final act of a dictator, but also a complicated symbol of international justice. Captured by US forces and tried in an Iraqi court, his hanging stirred global debate over ethics, legality, and the geopolitics of capital punishment. Over time, the United States started phasing out hanging in favor of what were considered to be more humane methods, like the electric chair, lethal gas, and eventually, lethal injection. It was an admission, albeit unspoken, of the horrifying realities associated with death by hanging. The last person to be hanged in the US met his fate in Delaware in 1996, a somber milestone marking the end of a long, brutal chapter. The American history of hanging is a complex tapestry interwoven with stories that force us to question our perspectives on justice, humanity, and the ultimate penalty. As with every other chapter in this dark tale, the US experience serves as a compelling narrative filled with moments that make us pause, reflect, and often shudder. The mechanics of death, the evolution of hanging methods. As we've journeyed through the unsettling history of hanging, one might wonder about the technical aspects, the actual methods used to carry out this grim sentence. As it turns out, even within the practice of hanging, there have been efforts to make the process more humane, or at least less agonizing. The earliest form of hanging involved the short drop. Far from a swift, painless death, this method would leave the condemned gasping for air, their neck muscles contracting in a futile attempt to break free. Death came slowly, agonizingly, through strangulation. It was a dark testament to the brutal nature of early judicial systems, where the suffering of the condemned was often part of the spectacle. Fast forward to the 19th century when the standard drop emerged as an attempt to make hangings more humane. Tailoring the length of the drop to the weight of the condemned was supposed to break the neck and induce instant unconsciousness. However, the calculations were far from precise, leading to grotesque incidents where the condemned would either decapitate or endure a protracted, agonizing death. Moving into the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we find the long drop. Using a morbid blend of physics and physiology, executioners would meticulously calculate the drop length based on the condemned's weight and height. The aim was to ensure a rapid, instantaneous death. It was science applied to the service of the gallows, a haunting union of intellectual rigor and dark intent. The technicalities of hanging methods tell their own tale. a story of human ingenuity applied to the grim science of death. Each evolution and method reflects changing attitudes toward capital punishment, even as they raise unsettling questions about the ethics of the act itself. This is Pastflix, and we'll see you next time.